All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Makarios. I am one of the co-chairs of the Ford Task Force, and on behalf of all the members of the Ford Task Force, many of whom are here wearing name tags like this, and we'll have a chance to talk to them later, but on behalf of all of us, thank you for coming out tonight. This is a great turnout. We're really excited about having some robust dialogue about some of the visions and really trying to help and having you help us tackle some of the big questions that are out there in terms of what we'd like to see at Ford, particularly when it comes to tonight's topic, which is about bicycles, pedestrians, and transit. But I also want to let you know about some future meetings that are coming up. We've got at least 3 more that are on the books with definite schedules. On Thursday, May 21st, we'll be holding another meeting right here in this location about streets, parking, and traffic. Tuesday, June 23rd, we'll be talking about stormwater and other infrastructure. And on Wednesday, July 22nd, we'll be talking about jobs and housing. All of those meetings are going to be held right here. So excited to have you come back and engage with us again on those topics on those evenings. Tonight's agenda, we're really going to spend about half an hour in this room kind of going over kind of what the key vision that the task force has developed and the city has developed over the last number of years, what some of the priorities are when it comes to bicycles and transit, and pedestrians, and then really identify what some of the key questions that we're grappling with, right? And that's where we want your input. Is what are some of the questions that some of the decisions that we need to make? How do these priorities play out on the street? And what are some of the decisions we need to make? And so after staff lays that out, we'll be wanting all of you to come talk with us, members of the task force and staff, about some of these different questions. And so we'll be at the tables in the back of the room and the tables out in the entryway. We actually have 2 sets of tables. They're identical topics, right? Just so we can kind of split up and spread out a little bit. So the tables in the back room are identical to the tables in the lobby. You don't have to go both places. Just come, do a loop, do a lap in one or the other, and kind of weigh in with us on some of the questions that we're trying to gauge kind of community input on. And at 8:30 we're going to quit and go home. So that's the plan. I want to, before I introduce Councilmember Tolbert, who's going to lead us into the next part of the agenda, I do want to recognize Representative Dave Pinto, who's here, our state representative for the area. Thanks for coming, Representative. And with that, Councilmember Chris Tolbert.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I'll be brief. I just want to welcome everybody. First of all, I think we should give this church a round of applause for hosting us again. They've been great. The pastor here and all the parishioners, they're great. It's not, I know Merritt looks hard for places that can seat all these people, and it's easier said than done to think about, and to find a location that's willing to host us. So that's we're really grateful for that. Tonight's an exciting night, and I know this is an issue that is very important to many people in our community, and it's to discuss the transit, the pedestrian, and the bike-friendly community that we could potentially build. One of the reasons that we're aiming to have a 21st century community, and why we call it a 21st century community, is because we have a great opportunity here to build and develop a site that reflects our modern uses. Much of our city was built long before many of us were born, and it's for the uses that were needed then. And it leads to really tough choices as local officials and for neighborhoods and for citizens to keep the character of the things that are important, like roads and streets and sidewalks, but also to adapt to things that attract new people, like bike paths, and to keep cities vibrant, and multimodal transit. And that's really the balance that we can strike at the Ford site, if we do it right, is to have that balanced approach where we don't have to make choices between parking in front of a business or a bike path. And that's really what's exciting about this opportunity here and the opportunity that we have before us. Secondly, we have an opportunity in the Riverview Corridor. I'm sure we'll get into more discussion here, but the Regional Rail Authority has been leading the way on the Riverview Corridor study, which is studying transit from downtown St. Paul at Union Depot to the light rail line, the blue line, to the airport to the Ford site, and really looking at what is the best way that we can have transit for the southern portion of St. Paul as well as through the Ford site. And that's going to be key. There's going to be another meeting on traffic and transportation because we know that cars are going to exist in the city of St. Paul as people age and as people need them. But we also need to address the fact that we do have congestion and we do not have major thoroughfares going through Highland Park where the Ford plant is. So how can we make it so that people can move through St. Paul and move through the Ford plant in a way that allows for growth at the Ford site? And that's really what this conversation's about. So in the future, we will be talking about that traffic, transportation, that parking issue, but that's such a big issue, and these are such big issues that Merritt, rightly so, said we need to separate these two things out. So it should be a good discussion. Before I leave, I do want to plug on behalf of the Highland District Council. Tia and Kathy Caruth asked me, the Tour de Highland, Kathy, is it the second or the third Tour de Highland? Second Tour de Highland on May 16th, 2 a.m., or not 2 a.m., sorry people who live on the streets, that 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I wrote it, part of it last year. It's really a fun event, and it's a good way for us to get together and kind of kick off the summer season. So go to that if you can, sign up. I think it's on your website. It's a fun event, and we should be exciting. So with that, I will turn it over to Merritt Clapsmith.
Thank you, Councilmember Tolbert, and thank you, all of you, for being here on a beautiful evening. I'm Merritt Clapsmith, and I'm a planner with the City of St. Paul and kind of a coordinator for this project, the Ford site planning. So we're going to start tonight. I'm just going to show you a few intro slides on what we're doing tonight and our process, and then turn it over to a couple of other folks to present the topics that we'll be asking for your input on. So for a number of sets of topics, we have some core principles that we identified first in a public meeting in November. And the principles we're focusing on tonight relate to transportation. And it might be hard to read these from the back, and I want you to understand what they are, so I'm just going to read them. First principle is that the site will have an interconnected system of streets, bikeways, and walkways that is safe and accessible for people of various ages and abilities. Second, a mix and density of activities to support transit through and around the site. And third, we'll use urban design and site layout to reduce auto trips and manage traffic impacts. So tonight's meeting, we will start to talk about the role that bicycling, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure plays in helping to do that. And at the next meeting, we will talk about it as well when we focus on streets, traffic, and parking. So we aren't discussing cars tonight. I know a lot of people in the community are very excited to talk about cars and traffic. So that will be at our next meeting on May 27th. And we're already a little worried this space won't be big enough. But we'll figure something out. So if you're interested in cars and how we'll be managing car trips, May 27th is the meeting for you. So the work that we're doing tonight is informed by other planning efforts that we have in the city. Our comprehensive plan, we had a Great River Passage plan for development and things along the river. We have the St. Paul Bicycle Plan, which is right now going through review at City Council, and a St. Paul Street Design Manual that looks at ways to design our streets and sidewalks and public realm. And finally, the Riverview Corridor study, which is underway. And there's a table tonight specifically on the Riverview Corridor study that the Ramsey County Regional Rail folks are hosting, and there's just one of those, and it's out in the lobby room, so be sure to stop by there, learn about what's happening with the study, since it relates so much to this site. So where are we at the process of the Ford work? We started in 2007. Some of you might have been with us then, where we put together ideas and key principles. We evaluated them, refined them. We had a number of studies to help us do that. We've now at the point of having identified some priorities, like our principles, and then questions we have. What do we still need to figure out? So what we're doing at these meetings is we're identifying those priorities, and then we're asking the questions and having your input help us figure out about decisions that will enable us to refine those priorities, and then to put together a zoning and public realm plan that would be adopted by the city early next year. And that will begin to set the stage for redevelopment beginning optimistically in 2018. So the purpose of this meeting and our other topic meetings is to share information, give background on the topic, identify often difficult choices and trade-offs we need to make for the site, to clarify expectations, what is it realistic for us to hope for and be able to achieve on the site, then to get your input on these priorities and questions. We'll use that to refine the priorities, and again, that will go into the zoning and public realm plan, which is a way for us to implement those priorities. So we thank you again for being here to help us in the stage, and I am now going to turn it over to Ruben Collins. Thank you.
Thank you, Merritt. My name is Ruben Collins. I'm with the Department of Public Works. I do in the Transportation Planning Division. I do a lot of the city's bicycle pedestrian planning. So I'm going to speak a little bit tonight about some trends we see in transportation, a little bit of sort of definitions of bicycle facilities and that sort of thing, and sort of tee up some of the posters that are around just to provide a little bit more context for them. What we see in transportation trends generally is that transit use is increasing. We see this with the Green Line. We made an investment in a transit infrastructure, and we've seen significant ridership on that so far. We know that bicycling and walking are increasing mode shares. And what we find is that neighborhood design, how we design our streets and how we design our built environment, influences the travel decisions that people make. If we built a neighborhood with no sidewalks, for example, we shouldn't be surprised to discover if nobody walks there. This graph on the bottom left shows the transportation modes to work that we see at some populations. So the United States and Minnesota are the first two, and they're pretty similar. So Minnesota generally is very similar to the rest of the country. The blue part is the driving mode share. The vast majority of us are driving to and from work every day. The third bar is St. Paul, and you can see that it's a slightly smaller share. That's about somewhere in the mid-70% of us are driving to work every day in St. Paul. And it's significant that St. Paul's mode share is slightly different from the rest of greater Minnesota, for example. And that's a reflection of our built environment, that we are an older city, we're a denser city with neighborhood commercial nodes and houses that are closer together than average we see in Minnesota. That's an example of how the built environment is already has influenced our travel decisions. A little bit about trip purpose, the reasons why we make trips. We can sort of categorize trips that we make. Work commute, school at work. Some of our trips are more flexible than others in terms of how we get around. We obviously all choose where we live and we choose where we work, but we don't make those decisions on a day-to-day basis. So based on where we live and where we work, we probably make some very similar decisions every day about how to get to work. A lot of us probably get up every day, take the exact same route in our car or the exact same bus to work on a day-to-day basis. There's not a lot of flexibility in that decision. But decisions about how we what sort of social or recreational activities we participate in, or where we do our shopping or errands, there is an opportunity there for the built environment to really influence how we are getting around. Those are decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. Where am I going to go eat dinner tonight? I can choose to drive across town to a restaurant, or I can choose to walk to the neighborhood restaurant. And each of us will make different choices, but the built environment will influence to some extent how we make those decisions. An important principle about traffic safety, and this applies to all modes of transportation. Volumes and speeds of modes. As volumes and speeds of users of any mode increases, the need to separate those users and provide separate spaces for those users increases. So on the picture on the left, we see an example of a street. You can notice the pavers. There is no real sidewalk on this street, for example. And this is an example of an environment where cars, motorists, and bicycles are just sharing the same space. There is not delineated space for any of those users. And the built environment is designed to encourage that. And this only works at low volumes of bicycles, pedestrians, and motor vehicles. If you take an environment like on the left and add large volumes of bicycles or motorists to that, all of a sudden it wouldn't work. It wouldn't function. The picture on the right is Mississippi River Boulevard today. And you can see that we have the roadway for motor vehicles, we have a bicycle path and a separate pedestrian path. And this is an example of where the numbers and volumes, the volumes and speeds of motorists, bicycles, and pedestrians are high enough that it warrants having that separated space for all the different types of users. A lot of things influence how attractive and how useful the pedestrian environment is. The graphic here on the right is a graphic from our St. Paul Street Design Manual, and this is an example of how the Street Design Manual influence how some design decisions are made on the Ford site. This is an example of a typical sidewalk, and we can split a sidewalk into what's called a frontage zone, which is the area right up against the building, where the friction between pedestrians on the sidewalk and the building cause pedestrians to slow down. And this is where you might stop and look through windows and window shop at a local business, or you might kneel down and tie your shoe or something. And you would often, the behavior we see is that pedestrians will hug up to the building to do something like that. Next, we have a pedestrian zone, which is where the movement of pedestrians on the sidewalk happens. Then there's a boulevard and furnishing zone where trees and street lights and benches or other sort of street furniture would go. And this is another example of providing separate spaces for separate types of uses so that we can keep sidewalks clear. An important question that we want to ask tonight is, what should the pedestrian environment look like, and what types of uses would we like to see on sidewalks? Should we be prioritizing space for things like sidewalk cafes or something like that within the Ford site? What are the characteristics of a sidewalk that will help make it a strong environment? I want to mention a few different types of bicycle facilities, because these are some terms that maybe everyone is not familiar with, and just to facilitate the conversation tonight, so make sure we're all on the same page about what some of these terms mean. The picture on top is a striped bicycle lane, and it uses just paint in the roadway to designate a piece of the roadway for bicycle travel. The picture in the middle is something called a protected bike lane, or sometimes the term cycle track will be used. We don't have any of these in St. Paul today, but many cities are building them, and so the question is, should we be prioritizing this type of bikeway on the Ford side? The benefit of these is that they do provide additional space and additional separation to increase safety for motorists and bicyclists and pedestrians by providing a dedicated space for bicyclists. The picture on the bottom is an off-street path, which is similar to what is along Mississippi River Boulevard today. So one of the questions we'll be asking tonight is, what types of bikeways should we be prioritizing within the Ford site? What should those networks look like, and what are the key connections that we need to make throughout the Ford site? These graphics show the existing and planned bicycle network throughout the Highland neighborhood. And clearly there are a lot more lines on the picture on the bottom, which is the planned network. And this is a vision set forth in the St. Paul Bicycle Plan of what bicycle facilities we should expect around the Ford site. In the bicycle plan, it doesn't lay out a network of bicycle facilities within the Ford site. It identifies the Ford site as an area for additional study. That additional study is happening now. The bicycle plan gives us some indication of how people riding bicycles may be approaching or getting to the Ford site. The question for us tonight is, how should those bikeways be extended into and throughout the Ford site? How will people get around the Ford site on a bicycle? Bicycle support facilities, so things like bike racks or amenities that could be located inside buildings like showers or lockers. Nice Ride is in the neighborhood. So the question is, how should the Nice Ride bicycle sharing system be incorporated into the Ford site? Are there specific design questions we want to, we need to take into consideration to make sure that bike sharing can be successful throughout the site? Pedestrian and bicycle corridors are a type of corridor or space that would be prioritized for either pedestrian or bicycle use, or both. There could be spaces where bicycles and pedestrians are permitted but not motor vehicles. There could be spaces where pedestrians are permitted and encouraged but that would prohibit bicycles. And these are four examples of different types of pedestrian or bicycle corridors. Each has different typical dimensions, each has different sort of purposes and characters. One of the goals for the site is that we want there to be a very strong pedestrian and bicycle network throughout the site. So what types of these corridors should we try to develop throughout the Ford site? Where should they be developed? How should this network of bicycle or pedestrian only corridors, how should that complement the network of roadways that we will build throughout the site? How will they interact? Where will they cross? Where will they intersect? And each of these corridor types has various characteristics and space requirements associated with it. Ford Parkway is the northern border of the Ford site, and the question about how are pedestrians or bicycles using Ford Parkway, how are pedestrians or bicycles, people using bicycles, how are they crossing Ford Parkway? We just replaced all of the sidewalks along Ford Parkway, so I think walking along Ford Parkway is a pretty good experience now. Crossing Ford Parkway can still be a challenge. It is a wide road. It's 4 lanes, plus turn lanes, plus parking lanes. It is a very wide road. Not all of the intersections are signalized. Crossing Ford Parkway at an unsignalized location is definitely a challenge. There are also questions about how Ford Parkway makes connections to Mississippi River Boulevard for motorists, pedestrians, and bicycle users. There are a lot of pedestrians and bicyclists that are coming across the Ford Bridge and then immediately want to turn down to reach Mississippi River Boulevard and the trails there. The existing sidewalk connections are in poor shape and not particularly well configured, and they could definitely use improvement. So the question is, how should we improve them? What does an improvement look like? We could replace it more or less in kind with what's there, or we could do something different, and what would that look like? There are some bottlenecks that exist along Mississippi River Boulevard for bicycles and pedestrians along the pathways. I mentioned earlier that separation of bicycles and pedestrians is really important to ensure especially pedestrian safety on these trails where bicycles are going a lot faster than pedestrians. In some places along Mississippi River Boulevard, we have separate pedestrian and bicycle paths. In some places we don't. And this is a picture looking north at the Ford Parkway Bridge. And where Mississippi River goes under the Ford Parkway Bridge is one of these bottlenecks. Where what should be a wide trail or separate trails for bicycles and pedestrians all gets necked down to about 6 or 7 feet of sidewalk space, and it is a bottleneck. So there are these pinch points along the corridor, and what should we do about that? How can we encourage safety where a bridge or a bottleneck exists that we may not be able to fix on any sort of short time frame? With that, I would like to turn it over to Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So my name is Michelle Beaulieu. I am a city planner in the Department of Planning and Economic Development, and my work focuses primarily on citywide and transportation planning. And in that capacity, I get to work with a lot of great people at other agencies outside of the city. So I want to call out today Scott Thompson, who should be here somewhere, from Metro Transit, and Mike Rogers and Tim Masich from Ramsey County Regional Rail Authority, who are our partners in transit planning at the city. So we anticipate that transit will be an important part of the Ford site redevelopment, particularly when we think about the principles that Merritt presented at the very beginning of the presentation. And so one of the boards that you'll see out at the tables is about the existing transit and planned transit that already exists in Highland. And what we want to hear from you folks is how should transit connect into the Ford site redevelopment? So you can see here that Highland already has a lot of transit lines that come through, and the A-line bus rapid transit is a great new opportunity. It's the region's first arterial bus rapid transit, which is basically an enhanced limited stop bus service that'll be serving Snelling and Ford Parkway. Another opportunity that's going on right now, as you've heard from some of the other people up here already, is the Riverview Corridor Study, which is being led by Ramsey County Regional Rail Authority. And they're out in the other room, as was mentioned. And they're looking at all modes of transit in any alignment connecting downtown St. Paul to potentially to the Ford site, to the airport and Mall of America area, all along West 7th Shepherd Road in this map. That study is going on right now, and it's really the beginning phase of planning for a high capacity transitway through St. Paul. This project will not be complete for many years, so this is a really great opportunity to be a part of the early phases of planning. And so they're out in the other room, as I mentioned, and that's Mike and Tim. And lastly, there's another opportunity happening right now with the Canadian Pacific Rail Spur, which used to serve the Ford factory, but planning so far has indicated that future heavy rail use is unlikely. And so the city is planning to study the potential for both transit and non-motorized uses, so pedestrians and bicycles, along that spur. And that study will begin next year. And so there are also boards out here, so you can tell us what you think about the CP Rail Spur. And as I mentioned, that will be specifically looking at potential ways to co-locate transit and non-motorized transportation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Merritt to wrap up.
Thank you, Michelle. So it looked like a bunch of you had already jumped into the topic tables before we got seated here. They should be pretty self-explanatory. These are the topic tables that we have tonight. There are 10 different subjects and tables, so you can pick one room or the other, as Kyle mentioned. And you can just move among the tables at your own pace, so you don't have to all stay here till 8:30. We haven't locked the doors. As soon as you've hit the different tables, provided the input you would like to, learned what you'd like to, you're free to head out. So we thank you. We're looking forward to hearing from you over the next hour, and please stay connected through our city website on the project. If you haven't already signed up to get our notices and wish to, you can leave your email in the sign-in sheets in the front entry. And with that, we can go to it. Thank you.